Hi, this is Dan O'Mano, and today I would like to speak a little bit about the Palestine, Israel, and Arab-Israeli conflict. The conflict between the Palestinian Arabs and the Jews is really a modern phenomena, in my opinion. It ignited sometime around the turn of the 20th century. Although these two groups have different religions, the Palestinians include Muslims, Christians, and Druze, religious differences, in my opinion, are not the cause of the conflict. Rather, I feel it is essentially a struggle over land and the control of that land. Until 1948, the area both groups claimed was known to most of us as Palestine. But following the war, the land was divided into three sections: the State of Israel, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip. Now, I think it's important to understand that this is really a small area we're talking about here. Approximately 10,000 square miles are equal to the size of the state of Maryland. The central issue has been and is competing claims which are not reconcilable if one group gets to exercise exclusive political control over the total territory. The Jewish claims to this land are based on a biblical promise to Abraham and his descendants. They cite the fact that this was the historical site of the Jewish kingdom of Israel and on the Jews' need for a haven from European anti-Semitism. Palestinian Arabs' claims, on the other hand, are based on their continuous residence in the country for many hundreds of years and on the fact that they have represented the demographic majority. They also reject the notion that a biblical-era kingdom constitutes the basis for a valid modern claim. If the Arabs argue at all biblically, then they maintain that since Abraham's son Ishmael is the forefather of the Arabs, it follows that God's promise of the land to the children of Abraham would include the Arabs as well. They also do not believe that they should have to forfeit their land to compensate Jews for what has happened in Europe, the Nazi Holocaust, etc., etc. In the 19th century, if we can look back for a minute, following a trend that was going on in Europe, people around the world began to identify themselves as nations, and they began to demand national rights. I believe they call the term sovereignty. Foremost of these was the right of self-rule in a state of their very own. Jews and Palestinians both began to develop a national consciousness and mobilize to achieve national goals. Because the Jews had been spread diasporically across the globe, their national movement, Zionism, entailed the identification of a place where they could come together through the process of immigration and settlement. Palestine seemed to be the logical and optimal place for this immigration, since it was the site of Jewish origin. A new movement, the Zionist movement, began just prior to the turn of the century with the first wave of these European Jewish immigrants. So the plot now thickens. Back then, the land of Palestine was part of the Ottoman Empire. However, this area did not constitute a single political unit. The northern districts of Acre and Nablus were part of the province of Beirut. The district of Jerusalem was under the direct authority of the Ottoman capital of Istanbul because of the international significance of the cities of Jerusalem and Bethlehem as religious centers for Muslims, Christians, and Jews. According to the Ottoman records, at that time, the vast majority of the inhabitants were Muslims, followed by Christians with just a scattering of Jews. The great majority of the Arabs comprised of a mix of Muslims and Christians and lived in very scattered rural villages, hundreds of them all over the place. I think Jaffa and Nablus were the largest and economically most important Arab towns at that time. Most of the Jews living in that area were concentrated in 4 cities that had religious significance: Jerusalem, Hebron, Safad, and Tiberias. It's also important to understand that their attachment to the land was religious in nature rather than national, and they were not involved in or supportive of the Zionist movement going on in Europe. It was the later Jewish immigrants who were committed to the goals of creating a Jewish nation and building a modern, independent Jewish state. So Zionism, or Jewish nationalism, is really a modern political thing. Among the most important of its core beliefs are that all Jews constitute one nation, not simply a religious or ethnic community, and that the only solution to anti-Semitism is a concentration of as many Jews as possible in that area and the establishment of a Jewish state. The key concept here is that Zionism drew on Jewish religious attachment to Jerusalem and the land of Israel. But the politics of Zionism was influenced by nationalistic ideology and by most Jews were not actually Zionists. Almost all Orthodox Jews could even be considered anti-Zionists. They believed that only God could reunite Jews in the Promised Land and regarded Zionism as a violation of God's will. But although Orthodox Jews continued to oppose the creation of a Jewish state for several more decades, they did support mass settlement of Jews in Palestine as a means of strengthening and protecting the community. Problems began when factions formed following the 1967 Arab-Israeli War, and even the Orthodox Jews began to believe that their victory was a sign from God. The areas captured and occupied in 1967, especially the West Bank, were important to religious Jews because they are the core of biblical land of Israel, including Judea and Samaria. Some existing political parties representing Orthodox Jews came to embrace religious nationalism, and new parties and movements formed to advocate Israel's permanent control and extensive Jewish settlement in the West Bank and Gaza.